Tilehurst End podcast
by Reading fans for Reading fans.
Jaap Stam had a dream. That dream is now over, sadly or not, depending on your point of view. But welcome to the emergency podcast of the Tilehurst End with your host, Marc, Mayo. And joining me is podcast extra host, Olly Allen, over down the other end of the line. How's it going, mate?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Marc. I'm a little bit shocked, to be honest, which sounds a bit surprising to say considering we've only won one in 19. But yeah, a little bit shocked that he's gone, finally.
Yeah, well, I must admit, we did have a podcast set up. I recorded it last night at the Star Hall of Fame event. That is now going to have to go up next Monday. Luckily, all the interviews we did were not time relevant, so that will go up as the official episode 156. But I was getting that ready, thinking it was a normal day. There was talk of Stam didn't do the press conferences after the Norwich defeat on the weekend. And I mean, I kind of shrugged that off. I didn't really think it was anything, but maybe we should have looked more into that as something relevant.
Yeah, I was with you on that, Marc. I tweeted afterwards that I wasn't sure we can really read much into it. Obviously, he sent Olderink to press conferences before early in the season and last season as well. So, yeah, perhaps. But, I'm not sure whether they would have still sent Olderink or whether Jaap Stam should have done it himself. But, yeah, certainly at the time, I wasn't reading too much into it.
Yeah, well, I'll read out the Reading FC official statement then. They said they've announced that Jaap Stam has left his position as manager of the club with immediate effect. Majority shareholders Mr Yongdai and Miss Xu Lai Di had wanted to give Jaap every opportunity to turn around what has been a difficult and challenging championship campaign. Jaap has not wavered in the time, effort and sheer determination he has put in to try to steer the team away from the position we find ourselves in. However, after careful consideration, the decision has been made that a change is now necessary. Interestingly enough, it says that he's left his position by mutual consent. What do you make of that? Do you think that that's something that shows that Jaap Stam himself was kind of leaning towards, this isn't working out, let's jump ship?
Possibly. I think sort of the cynic inside me sort of that's perhaps just media speak for he's been sacked. I think a lot of club statements nowadays sort of say mutual consent, but at the same time, I think obviously Jaap has said in interviews early in the season, sort of if the owners can find someone better, then they should sack me. So I mean, I'd imagine he would have met with the owners after the defeat at the weekend, and I suppose they might have come to a mutual decision. But at the same time, as I said, I think perhaps they're just trying to soften it over, and perhaps that he has obviously with one win in 19 games, the owners might have felt that the decision was sort of taken out of their hands, really.
Yeah, it's certainly a case of, legalities and all sorts of what exactly the settlement is and all those sort of things, where the Stam leaves, it obviously says immediate effect. So I presume that means he's not gone on gardening leave, which we've seen with managers of the past. He has, moved on from the club. Not mentioned in the statement is the fate of his assistants. We'll talk about the replacements a little bit later and the odds on that, but Olderink hasn't been, named in this statement as someone who's gone. Someone like Brian Teverden, who's not necessarily linked to Stam, but maybe his future is in doubt. He hasn't been mentioned in the statement either, so it's all about Stam at the moment. And really, I want to drill down into the idea of whether this is the right decision. You've got to consider the timing. Reading 3 points off the relegation zone, 10 points we've collected since December 3rd, which is by far the lowest in the division, all teams accounted for. And really, I think I probably settled about late December after the Burton and Birmingham games that Stam wasn't going to take the club forward. I decided after that there were certain moments when teams put in unacceptable performances, and it happens every few games in a season, but to have two in such quick succession, I made my mind up by then. Why do you think the club have waited so long to do this? Do you think it was the right decision to hold out as long as we have, given that nothing has improved in that time?
I think in fairness, it actually is quite refreshing to see a club sort of give a manager time, and I think you certainly can't fault the owners for sort of giving Jaap Stam as much time as he can to turn it around. But unfortunately, it's just sort of not quite worked out. And I mean, I thought that he'd probably stay until the summer at least, but obviously as the defeat at the weekend obviously moved us 3 points closer to the relegation zone. That might have been the final straw. I think obviously with 8 games left, I'm not too sure how much the owners are actually seeing of Reading play this season. We're not entirely sure whether they've attended many of the games, but I think they were eager to give him time, which as I said is refreshing. But ultimately, I think when you get to the run that we've been on, and obviously with the defeat at the weekend, I think it sort of was the final straw for them probably.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to know exactly how much the sort of the Chinese owners, obviously they're named in the statements, the majority shareholders, exactly how much they've been watching, whether they considered before the Norwich game or whether they'd set up a point sort of total that they wanted from the Bolton and Wolves game and Norwich game, whether they thought that the manner of the defeats was the most important thing. Those obviously are things that we probably will never know. I mean, let's rewind back to the start when Jaap Stam joined the club, and we did so well last year to get to Wembley. Obviously, performance issues and perhaps boring football aside, the fact is that Reading did very well and they did overachieve in a year that we largely thought we'd be aiming mid-table, perhaps pushing for a bit of playoffs, and we got third place. At that point, do you think that Stam has been dealt with fairly? Because there'll be a lot of fans saying, oh, well, we don't know how good we've got it. We used to be in Division 3 and all the rest of it. Stam could have maybe turned it around next season if he'd have stayed. Is it really fair to think that, one bad season is enough for a manager these days, or, is it actually the right decision to let him go?
Yeah, well, I think certainly in the modern era, football is certainly a very short-term results game, and obviously if you look at Reading's short-term results, they've been very, very poor. And obviously, I think, as you mentioned there, we can't forget last season. Obviously, it was fantastic, and as I said, Stam obviously has got Reading closest to the Premier League as we have been since we got relegated. Obviously, two penalty kicks away at Wembley, which was obviously gutting. But and there was certainly a feeling. Obviously, he signed a new contract in the summer that he could certainly build on last season coming into this season. But yeah, I think the big question here is had to ask themselves was were we going to go down under Stam? And I think that's probably what made their mind up in the fact that they wouldn't want to be in charge of a club that's playing third tier football. And I wrote an article on this a few weeks ago, but obviously Reading were a third tier club largely in the 70s and 80s and what have you. But I think certainly for me anyway, that is largely irrelevant now. And I think certainly we've built our position as certainly a championship club that's fighting towards getting into the Premier League. Also, we had 3 seasons in the Premier League within the last 10, 12 years or so. But certainly I think going into League One wouldn't have been best for the club, and I think that's probably why they've made the decision they have.
Yeah, we've been talking for a little while on the Tilehurst end sort of privately about how being in League One might pan out and how it may not be a disaster, how it can actually, revitalise the club in a lot of senses to sort of, the fans going to different grounds, more of an away following, certain things that just sort of refresh the club and getting promotion back out. But I think you're right in saying that from the owner's point of view, as an asset, a League One club, it pales in comparison to a Championship club and the promised lands again into the Premier League. Do you think that, obviously we're going to have a manager now. Do you think you would rather go for a caretaker manager towards the end of the season, or would you rather, opt for someone who's maybe out of work, maybe it's going to be very hard to take someone away from their existing job and get them as a long-term solution? Which of those sort of makes more sense to you at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's probably the difficulty in the fact that if we want a manager long-term, then we're probably going to have to buy someone from another club, and that right now probably isn't very possible, especially in the position that we're in. So we might be best perhaps getting in a caretaker manager, whether that is someone from within the club, the likes of Michael Gilks, or Scott Marshall, perhaps in charge of the under 23s, or whether that's someone who's currently out of a job. But yeah, I think certainly bringing in, I don't think Reading's a very promising proposition for a manager coming from another club. Certainly whether that's either higher in the Championship or in League One, I'm certainly not sure a manager's going to be tempted by the position that we're currently in. So yeah, perhaps a caretaker manager until the end of the season might be the best chance, and then start building a game with a new manager in the summer.
I think that certainly, if you're a manager at a different club, whether that's a Championship club or League One club, you'd look at Reading in the Championship with a fresh start of the new season. You'd see that as a very promising opportunity. But if you start as a long-term replacement and you take the club down, that already sets it on such a negative. And the fans, obviously there's no one happy at the club. Either you wanted Jaap Stam sacked and you're unhappy because of the state the club is in, or you wanted Jaap Stam to be given more of a chance and you're unhappy because he's gone. So there isn't anyone sort of delighted at the moment, and as a result, coming in as someone who's going to make a long-term stamp on the position and then getting relegated, it's just it's a disaster really. Let's look at the odds for who is being discussed at the moment. I've just got the live Sky Bet odds, and Paul Clement has raced into being the favourite for the manager's job. He was 8-1 when this market was first opened on Sky Bet. I haven't had a chance to look at any of the others. We're only an hour after the sacking, and there's not been any further announcement from the club. So 6-4, Paul Clement is with Sky Bet at the moment, miles ahead of Mark Warburton's 8-1, Marco Silva 10-1, Andres Aldering, Stam's assistant, 10-1, as is Parkinson, Graham Murty and Nigel Pearson are back at 12-1. Paul Clement, I mean, he's a decent, experienced manager. Yeah. I've got his history up in front of me. I think that at Derby County he did relatively well and then was a little bit hard done by to get sacked. He's been assistant, obviously, Chelsea, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Paris Saint-Germain, Blackburn Rovers, and Swansea. He was at most recently. You know, he left with only 14 wins out of 41 games at Swansea. Again, perhaps hard done by, given what happened after that and the struggles they've had until they brought in Carvajal. It's a hard one with Clement. I'm not entirely sure what I would expect his playing style and such to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always seen sort of Clement as a very good coach rather than a good manager, and that sort of tells with, as you mentioned, all the high profile jobs he has had as an assistant. But yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, I think he did fairly well at Derby and was sort of quite harsh to sack him, but and he does have those connections. I think obviously we've seen him bringing Renato Sanchez on loan from Bayern Munich. He's had those connections with Bayern Munich, and obviously he knows Carlo Ancelotti. So there might be some sort of agreement there, but certainly, yeah, I mean, he's not that experienced as a manager, and perhaps I think more than anything right now, we need sort of a motivator to sort of get us out of this rut and get us out of this situation, and whether Clement is that man, I'm not too sure.
Certainly be one to look at. I was just thinking about how he did at Swansea, and he came in at Swansea with them, you know, massively struggling towards the bottom, and he won the Premier League Manager of the Month competition for the first month that he was at Swansea. Under his guidance, Swansea won 26 points from 18 games, and that secured their Premier League status. He, you know, as I say, left when they were bottom this December, but that was having sold Fernando Llorente and Gylfi Sigurdsson. So there's a lot of factors to consider in there, and Paul Clement, he doesn't have many clubs in his repertoire as a full-on manager, but as I say, 6-4 at the moment. He's raced ahead in terms of the odds. We'll end on Stam, then have a short discussion on his legacy. How do you think Stam will be remembered for his service to Reading? I think in the wider media he'll always be remembered as the playoff final, because that's the most important thing for them to look at. How do you think he'll be remembered for the fans?
I think for the fans, I think certainly a lot of them this season would have tarnished that, which is a shame, obviously, because last season, despite obviously the performances weren't great and the football wasn't that entertaining, but ultimately we did get to Wembley and we had a couple of great games. The playoff semi-final against Fulham was superb. The wins against Leeds and Sheffield Wednesday in the build-up to that were absolutely excellent. But I think ultimately, unfortunately, I mean, not for me, but I think unfortunately for a lot of fans, this season has sort of tarnished that a little bit. Not only the results, I think also the way he sort of addressed fans in his press conferences and sort of said that if they don't like it, they shouldn't turn up, and then sort of going back on that and saying that more should turn up and encouraging them to sort of make their voices heard more. But yeah, I think ultimately, obviously as I said earlier, he did get as close to the Premier League as we have got since relegation. But this season, I think a lot of fans have sort of lost the end of their tether. And I think ultimately the fact that he stayed for so long, despite so many fans sort of wanting him out from around Christmas time, I think fans have, like, sort of their frustrations have sort of grown from that moment onwards, and the fact that they want him out, so they can't really see any positive in what he's doing. So ultimately, I think that he may have tarnished his reputation there, perhaps.
I think there's certainly some of the fans, even when we got to Wembley last season, were kind of tired with the way that he'd been playing football, and obviously that came after a period of not much great success in general terms anyway, which I think a lot of people will remember him for. I mean, ultimately, it's going to depend on whether we get relegated or not. If we stay up and, you know, the new manager obviously either does a great job or we squeeze through and do it as we have been doing these last few weeks, that will be the thing that I think for Stam will really be as we remember him. If ultimately we go down, it will be on Stam's head that a lot of the fans remember it. I mean, the thing that many people were kind of worried about Stam leaving is that maybe he's going to go on and be a great manager elsewhere. Obviously, he's got such a big name, such a big personality, it's probably fair to say as well. Do you think that Stam will go on and become a great manager elsewhere? And if he is, what does he need to do that is different from what he did at Reading?
I think he certainly can be. Obviously, he's still quite young in terms of managing. He's 44, 45, and as you said, he's a big name, so he'll always attract sort of those jobs. And I think already he's second favourite for the Oxford job now. But I mean, I think they've been looking for about 2 months or so for a new manager. And obviously we've seen him linked to jobs in the Netherlands as well. He was linked to the Vitesse job before Leonard Slutsky was given that one. So I think he'll certainly be getting a job. I think certainly perhaps in the summer we might see him appointed. I think probably in terms of probably his biggest downfall perhaps at Reading was probably his stubbornness, sort of his refusal to sort of change the system when it's not been working. I think he certainly won't change away from his philosophy of sort of the possession football. And I think we can certainly see that wherever he goes next, such is the nature of Dutch managers. But certainly I think he needs to be able to have a plan B, or to sort of be able to be more flexible in changing things up, because certainly his downfall at times at Reading was sort of his stubbornness and his refusal to change things when they weren't working. But if he can become less stubborn perhaps at a new club, then he could certainly do very, very well. Obviously we've seen Brendan Rodgers do very well since leaving Reading, and Stam could certainly do the same.
Yeah, I agree on flexibility is certainly something he needs to add to his game as well. I think it's going to depend so much on the players he gets, because the players that we have at this football club at the moment, I mean, some of them you would say like Liam Kelly and John Swift are so well attuned to his style. Some of them, sort of Dave Edwards, John Daddy Bob Varson, I wouldn't say are particularly Stam style players, and therefore it depends where he's going to go. Obviously Brendan Rodgers went to Swansea, which perfectly suited him. It sort of does as well at Celtic and did at Liverpool. Stam is going to have to pick his next job very carefully. I don't think going down to League One is really going to suit his style, given that he likes to get the ball down, he likes to knock it round, and maybe it'll take going back to Holland, or maybe even a big team in a small league such as Celtic or further abroad will be going down for him. Let's end on a positive note then. Obviously at Tilehurst End we do want to place on record our thanks for Jaap and his dedication to the world. That's certainly never been doubted, that he's always been wanting the best for the club. And I think end on your favourite moment then from Jaap Stam's reign.
Probably the playoff final. The playoff final was terrible. The playoff semi-final victory against Fulham. Just the sheer euphoria bit. It was a very, very tight game. Also after the first leg finishing 1-1. When Jan Kermgan got that penalty, and it was still very, very tight until the final whistle. But just sheer euphoria. Thanks to Jaap for taking us all the way to Wembley last season.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to agree that playoff semi-final was the sort of epitome of Reading being a hard-working team that sort of ground out results, were dogged, had excellent game management, got a little bit of luck here and there, but certainly made the most of it. And it's sadly that description is completely not what we've had in these last few months, over the whole season in general, to be fair. 3 points away from the relegation zone. Let's hope that whoever comes in, obviously we've got the international break now, they will have time to come in, get their feet under the table and hit the ground running. So that is it then. We'll be as I say, we'll be back early next week with the Star Hall of Fame podcast, where we spoke to Sir John Wadesky, Bar McDermott, Kevin Doyle and Nicky Hammond about their sort of legacy at the club, looking back and all things not Stam basically. And then Ollie will be back with the podcast extra in about 10 days time or so. So cheers for joining me this morning, mate.
No worries at all.
And thank you for listening. It's going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on for the next couple of weeks, being a Reading fan, and eventually back into the football with Queen's Park Rangers at home on the Friday. Paul Clement, it might well be. If it is, let's obviously get behind him and back the boys. Come on, you arse.
Funny how you smile. Funny how the crowds always